Good morning, good evening, good afternoon. How's everybody doing? So this is a quick video to just do a couple reminders on expectations, directions for the exam, and then to just jump into the questions and give a little bit of analysis and clarification on them. So pretty simple. So first important reminder is that the exam is due Thursday, December 16, 11:59 p.m. That's an absolute deadline. If you turn it in after that point, it will be marked late if you have not asked for a proper extension and be given confirmation in advance, right? Simple as that. After that deadline, it's late. Absolutely. Even if your exam is late, turn in your exam. Turn in your exam. Turn in something, right? Do not turn in your exam, because that is a recipe for a failing grade, and I don't want to have anyone in that position. So we've got issues of length, 3 pages, 2 questions, just like the midterm, a page and a half for each minimum, for each answer only. For each answer only. That means not including the question, which I'd like you to leave in at the beginning of your answer, which is to say before your answer. And of course, that's a page and a half minimum, but length is no proof of a good answer. So if you write 3 pages and you're not focused on the questions I'm asking specifically, that's going to be an issue as well. So again, next reminder in terms of the directions, I would really like everyone to do their best to focus as much as possible on answering these questions as directly as possible and staying within the scope of what's specifically being asked. Then the last thing I want to mention in terms of directions is two interrelated things. You must cite from the text when it's appropriate as supporting evidence for your claims. When you cite from the text, whenever what is being cited is not perfectly obvious what's being said, you need to provide a little explanation. And of course, when you cite from the text, you do not need to quote directly. You could paraphrase. But remember, when you paraphrase an important element from the text, you need to cite it. I think that's one thing that everyone could have been stronger on the last exam. When you mention something that's specific to the text that it says, you need to cite it, right? And then so there absolutely you need to cite quotations, the amount that's necessary. If you give me a whole paragraph that is a quoted paragraph from Rousseau or from Orwell, what you're doing is just taking up space and filling in that page and a half, but you're not really answering the question. Do not give me a whole paragraph's worth of quotation. If you need that whole element of what's said in the text, then you need to start paraphrasing and boil down the quoted portion of it to the absolute essential minimum. You need to quote periodically. Exactly how much, it's up to you, but you need to quote periodically to demonstrate that what you're saying is derived from the text. And by quoting from the text, it keeps what you say as specific as possible. When I start talking about whatever question it may be, or I ask you to give an example, you want to be as specific as possible. Provide detail. And that only comes from staying close to the text, and so on and so forth. Last thing is that under no circumstances whatsoever should you be relying on any secondary literature that's not assigned for this course, or any outside sources, or any online sources. We live, I know, in the world of cut and paste, right? But that's strictly forbidden, number one, by the rules of the exam, the directions of the exam, and number two, if you're cutting and pasting things and not citing them properly, well, then you're plagiarizing, and that is strictly forbidden, and you'll receive a failing grade for that. And part of the function of Turnitin is to, basically it scours the internet for the text, and if anything pops up, it registers in some of the functions that it has on my end. Okay, so with all those lovely details in hand, let's move on to the questions. So you've got 2 questions Each you have to write 1.5 pages minimum, and that is a total of 3 pages in terms of the answers alone. When you turn in your final version of the exam, I would like you to leave these questions in before you answer. Some people during the midterm, like the questions weren't even numbered. In some cases, they merged one thing to the next. Think of this as 2 separate essays, one on each set of questions, right? And I'd like you to leave those questions all in at the beginning. It allows me to refer back to them. It also should allow you to refer back to them as you're editing and as you're writing to say, gee, what exactly was the question that was asked, or what is the next part of the question that I need to answer, so on and so forth. So there's 2 questions. The first deals with Rousseau's discourse on the origin of inequality, and the second one deals with Orwell's 1984. So let's jump into the questions. The first question deals with primarily the entirety of the question deals with these 2 concepts or notions of self-love presented by Rousseau in the Discourse on Inequality, or the second discourse, right? So explain what Rousseau means by the terms amour de soi-même and amour-propre. So these are the 2 terms for self-love that Rousseau uses in the text. And one can be translated as self-love, amour de soi-même, and amour-propre can be translated as vanity. But underlying, they have the same connotation of being a form of self-love, but we discover that they're 2 different forms, right? So these 2 forms, these are 2 forms of love or desire. Make sure to explain what they are and also their differences in terms of these categories: the nature of the desire, the object and magnitude of the desire, and issues of self-sufficiency and dependence, and the role played by what Rousseau calls ideas of merit, including the role of comparison and competition. Okay? And so just one side note, that Rousseau provides a definition of these 2 concepts on page 218 in note Roman numeral 15, what I have right here, right? And that definition is very informative, but it's not the whole picture. And there are other places where he mentions things that make it clear. And for example, these English terms, self-love and vanity, as you read through the text in the sections that I have assigned and the sections that I've focused on, you will see the word, when it says self-love, the French word there is amour de soi-même. When you see the word vanity, that is a translation for amour-propre. And as far as I'm aware, the translators of the text, because it's originally in French, are very consistent that, for example, when you see the word love or self-love, we're talking about amour de soi-même. And when you see the word vanity, it's translating the expression amour-propre. Okay, so one form of self-love, part B, one form of self-love is good and leads to human happiness, while the other is considered bad and leads to unhappiness and misery. Which is which, and why is one good and one bad? Now, which is a pretty straightforward answer. It's one and the other. Why is one good and one bad? Well, he gives you a lot of features. What does he present in the second discourse? He presents a history of human civilization, basically from pre-civilized times to the development of civilization all the way up to this incredibly sophisticated period of 18th century France that he's living in, right? And what does he chart? He charts this transformation from mankind in his natural condition to his civilized condition, right? And in that transition, essentially we're getting many, many examples from one stage to the other, one state to the other, of amour de soi-même to amour-propre, right? And in those examples, you can start to see illustrated just why one is good and one is not good, or one is bad. And so there are many different things you might pick up on there, right? Let me just say that. If the origins of political social and economic inequality reside in the historical transformation of eros, or self-love, from amour soi-même to amour propre, explain how Rousseau believes this transformation occurred. Right? Let me give you a little note. He says man is naturally good, and amour de soi-même is connected with this natural man, or this, it's often described as noble savage, or this uncivilized man living out, woman living out essentially in the forests, right? Even pre-hunter and gatherer, in the early stages of hunting and gathering, right? If man's nature, he says, man comes from the author good and is corrupted in society. Well, if man's nature is good and not fallen, as the Bible suggests, how is it that he could ever possibly have become corrupted in the first place? Human nature, by definition, typically, is something that is static. The concept of nature is essentially something eternal, or something fixed, something that mankind is unable to change, by definition, right? So like the law of gravity or something like that. So how is it, given that man comes from the author of things, or nature comes from nature good, how can he possibly be corrupted, right? And Rousseau, we talked about this in class, and it's in the PowerPoints and in my lectures. There's a very specific explanation that's given as to how this is possible. And on one hand, it has something to do with the nature of man and what man is capable of becoming or being. And then it also has to do with something else. Let's just say, I'll give you a little hint, outside of human nature. What you might call exogenous forces. Look up that word, exogenous. It's a great word. Okay. Moving along. Oh, let me finish. What does Rousseau identify as some of the key physical and psychological developments which caused this transformation? Maybe I should say physiological and psychological. So the transformation results in a transformation of the human soul, the human psyche, in certain ways. Certain things get activated, right? And the question is, how does he describe this? What changes? Number 2, Orwell's 1984. First, what does it mean for a political regime to be totalitarian? Obviously, we've said that the world of 1984 is a kind of classic example of a totalitarian regime. So my first question is, what is a totalitarian regime? Now, let me be really clear. The novel exemplifies this concept, but Orwell does not describe this world as totalitarian, despite the fact that it really fits all the categories of a totalitarian regime. So I provide some information about what a totalitarian regime is in the PowerPoints, in the videos, and we talked about it in class, right? So this is something that you're not going to get directly from the text, but the text illustrates, it exemplifies this concept, even without using the word. All right, B. In its simplest definition, a totalitarian regime is one that exercises total or close to total control for all aspects of its citizens' lives. So I give you one big little hint there. Describe what the panopticon and panopticonism is and how this technique is manifest in the world of 1984. Again, the words panopticon or panopticonism and the concepts behind them are not explicitly invoked by the text. These are elements that I brought up in PowerPoints and in videos. But this world, again, exemplifies the principles of a panopticon and the principles of panopticonism, two related but slightly different concepts, right? And what I'm asking you is how this concept is manifest in the world of 1984. C. As we've seen in the symposium, one of the basic strategies of tyranny, or totalitarianism, because they're closely related, is to divide and conquer the people in their relationships to themselves and to one another. Explain how this strategy works and how it's manifest in examples from 1984. So, how does divide and conquer work? And provide specific, detailed examples from 1984 that illustrates this strategy of divide and conquer and control. Right? D deals with newspeak. A major form of control is through language and ideas which regulate not only what people say, but what and how they think about the world, themselves, and their relationships with others. This form of language control is summed up in this thing called newspeak. So my question is, what is newspeak? Explain what newspeak is and how it is used as a form of speech and thought and as a strategy to control people. As part of newspeak, there is a kind of device of control, a strategy of thought called doublethink. So what is that and how is it part of? What is the consequence of newspeak on the individual psychology of the inhabitants of this world generally, including its impact on their relationship with themselves and each other? Now, this question can primarily be answered in relationships that Winston has with other characters and also with himself. He has a neighbor that's down the hall. He has someone at the Ministry of Truth that he works with. They have conversations. And you can see the effects of this language on those people in the way it shapes their thought. And then, of course, there's a relationship with Julia that is further, at least in part, controlled, not completely, by this linguistic system called newspeak, right? Okay, so the two basic parts of the question here are really what is newspeak, and again, how is it used to control people, to control their relationship with others, with themselves, and you could say with society at large. Okay, so that pretty much wraps it up. Good luck. If you have questions, please let me know, and I will be more than happy to answer them. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.